to make this observation that it gets translated Deuteronomy, which they translate it sounds like a second law, but really what Deuteronomy is a repetition of what we've seen in the first 4 books, a recounting of the history, and then really an expansion of the Ten Commandments. From chapter 6 forward, all the way to 26, I've said this before, that the Ten Commandments are really subheadings for all the other commandments. So what we're going to have in the book of Deuteronomy is further explanations for these commandments and further examples of how these commandments are to be lived out. I personally find the book of Deuteronomy a really great book for the very reason that it gives a lot of explanations and reasons for why things happen. Things that were commanded in the first 4 books, we often get an explanation for it in Deuteronomy, which is kind of nice, and we'll point that out as we go through the book. So, in the middle of the second page, I note that Deuteronomy is one of the most quoted books in the Bible. The apostolic writers quoted over 80 times in 17 of 27 books. Yeshua used Deuteronomy to confirm his messiahship, to summarize the Torah, and to refute Satan. Matthew 4:4. Deuteronomy is quoted 356 times in the later books of the Tanakh, which points to the importance of its content and the significance of its truth. Judging from the amount of copies of Deuteronomy produced at Qumran, where we get the Dead Sea Scrolls, we would be safe to conclude that the book of Deuteronomy was highly esteemed. But what is the theme of Deuteronomy? If I could pick a theme for Deuteronomy, it's the love of God, which is interesting. You would think, as we talked about the law, and he's going to reiterate the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy 5, and then from Deuteronomy 6 to 26, he's going to expound on the 10 and give us further explanation of the 10. You would think with all of this law that you wouldn't think that love would be a primary theme. But let me argue that loving God is being obedient to what he's asked us to do. That when God asks us to love him, he's not asking us to have a feeling or an emotion for him, but asking us to live in obedience to him. In fact, the Torah is going to, on numerous occasions, ask us to do things when we don't feel like doing it. It's going to command us to say, you know what? Sometimes you have to put your feelings aside and do the right thing just because I asked you to do it and commanded you to do it, even when you don't feel like doing it. Love in the scriptures is not primarily an emotion or a feeling. It is a commitment to a covenant. And it's obedience to that covenant based on commands and based on rules and regulations that God gives to us. Yes?
You know, we can see this evidence pretty clearly in many children today. Almost without exception, children I've seen that are the most atrocious to be around, their parents have never disciplined.
Right.
And child, I think with children like that, they feel a very deep sense of not being loved, not being cared for. Right. I think that's a child's natural reaction. Just like what God said, just like you said, the law of the Son.
Right. And the fact that God, here's the thing, the fact that God speaks to us is grace. The fact that he gives us and tells us what he wants. If he were hiding himself from us and saying, you know what, I have a will that I want you to live up to. However, I'm not going to tell you how to accomplish my will. If he hid himself from us and then punished us because we didn't do what he wanted when he never told us, we would say, well, that just seems unfair. It seems harsh. He actually says to us, here's what I want you to do. And let me go back to what I said earlier about the fact that it's not about how we feel. Let me give you the example we used before. Your neighbor's cow acts accidentally wanders into your field, and you know that this neighbor doesn't like you, in fact, he hates you, the inclination that you're going to have is, you know what, this thing wandered off, that's its own fault. Steak tonight to me. You know, I'm going to slaughter this thing. I'm going to roast this baby. He'll never even know and by the way, we'll eat the evidence and bury the rest of it. And I know that the guy doesn't like me, so that's even better. But I know that it's his. The Torah says, all those feelings and emotions that well up in you, it says, no. First of all, feed the animal while you have it. Do right by the animal. And then make sure you get the animal back to your neighbor. And if your neighbor is on vacation, then you feed the animal all the time that he's on vacation. And make sure when he's off vacation, you take it back to him. You don't feel like doing that. Now you've got more work to do with this animal than you had before. And this is a person you know doesn't even like you. And the inclination is, he doesn't like me, you know what? Okay, fine. I'm not helping him out. That's how we feel. Torah says, no. You go against your feelings. You do the right thing even when you don't feel like it. That's a tough one to learn. We've been trained that we should do what we feel. And we should only be, we should only be obedient to commandments when we understand them. Only if we understand the commandment. Now the beauty of Deuteronomy is, it does give us a lot of rationale. But what if God gives us a commandment and doesn't tell us the reasons? Should we do it anyway?
Yep.
Or should we say, like many people have said, well, I'm not doing that because it doesn't make any sense to me. And until I can understand how it makes sense and how it all works, and all the ins and outs, I'm not doing it. Yes?
Going back to Marcus, as children, we tell our children, we need to do this. And it's like, why? It doesn't matter why, just do this.
Right. Sometimes parents have to say, like God does, because I said so. Because even if I sat down and explained it to you at 2 or 3, you still wouldn't understand it. I could give you all the rationale, and you would go, look, how many of us did not understand all the things that our parents told us to do until we became a parent? Then all of a sudden you start, and you have that moment when you go, aha. And not with that aha, but I'm sounding like my parents. I didn't want to do that. You know, I wanted to be, different. But yet you say to them, where are you going when they leave? And who are you going to be with? And can you call me when you get there? And what time are you going to be home? I want to know where you are and who you're with. Why? I'm old enough to know what I'm doing. Why do I have to tell you where I'm at and who I'm with? Because I said so. Yeah.
It's not just understanding what our parents told us when we were mature. It's why our parents told us those things.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's the understanding of the why. Now, I want to mention this with regard to Deuteronomy. It's love. You have your page. I'm going to read a little bit here on the love of God. Which, by the way, when I ask people, what book talks most about the love of God? Most people would not pick Deuteronomy. You wouldn't say, oh yeah, Deuteronomy pops right to mind.
1 Corinthians 13.
Yeah. 1 Corinthians 13, love. That's a love chapter. Deuteronomy talks more about love than 1 Corinthians 13 does. Listen to this. Of all the books of the Hebrew Scripture, Deuteronomy most clearly presents Yahweh's love for Israel and the imperative necessity of Israel's love for Yahweh in return. One key passage of Deuteronomy on the love of Yahweh is in 7:7-11. In commanding that Israel be a separated people, God reminds them of their election as his own special possession from among the peoples of the earth. Lest Israel should become proud of being in such a select and favored position, God goes on to remind them of the nature of his love for them and Israel's responsibility to him. From this passage, it can be clearly seen that Yahweh's love is an undeserved, selective affection by which he binds himself to his people and which precipitates in the redemption of his people from bondage. Because Yahweh has demonstrated his love by the act of redemption, the redeemed are thus obligated to demonstrate their love for Yahweh in return. Such a love is best manifested in terms of loyalty, service to God, and obedience to his commands. Listen to John. By the way, if you think this has changed, you say, well, okay, but this is Deuteronomy, and this is for Israel. Two things are going to mitigate against that. We're going to see throughout Deuteronomy that he includes over and over again the ger, the foreigner, in this. Deuteronomy is the book that really goes and talks about the ger, the foreigner, and their inclusion in this process. So that it's not just a Jew-Gentile issue. But beyond that, listen to John, this is John, book of John, 14:15. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. That's John 14:15. Things haven't changed. And this goes back to our earlier discussion. The reason why he can say, if you love me, keep my commandments, is because Yeshua and Yahweh are one and the same. They're so tied together as to be inseparable. They're distinct but inseparable. And because Yahweh can say, love me and keep my commandments, Yeshua can say, if you love me, keep my commandments. And these aren't different or new commandments. Now, I'm going to end with this. Go with me to Deuteronomy chapter 1. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 20. I want to make a point here that's going to set some of the tone for the book. Deuteronomy chapter 20, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 20. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 20, and let's read this together. He says this. Verse 20 says, and I said to you, you have come to the mountains of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. Notice, it's giving us. It's participial. Is in the process of doing. It's ing. He's giving us this. So it's a participle. Now notice the next verse, however, says this, verse 21. Look, the Lord your God has set the land before you. That's actually, he has given it to you. Now it's perfect. Go up and possess it as the Lord God of your fathers has spoken to you. Do not fear or be discouraged. In the first verse, he says he's giving it to you. In verse 21, he says he's given it. He is giving it. 20, he's giving it. Future. In 21, he says he's given it. Past tense. How can that be? How can verse 20 say he's giving it? That's future. And in 21, he's given it to them. Past tense. And the book of Deuteronomy does this all over the place. How can that be? How can it be that in verse 20, you answer the question, how can it be that in verse 20 he's giving it, and verse 21, it's already given?
Because he's already cleared the way.
He's already cleared the way, yeah, what?
Sorry, he knows he has been past, present, future.
Sure. God stands outside of time. Yes, go ahead.
Because he was given it, they still have to go in and take possession.
That's great. That's great. She's right. He's already given it to them, but they still got to go possess it. It's already a done deal, and yet it still has to happen. And I want to make this point. It's interesting. The scriptures, to be full and complete, say, I'm giving it to you, but you have to go take it. So it's not either or, it's both. There's times in the scriptures he says, I've given you the land. And you think, well, it's not, that's great, I just got to go in and get it. He says, later on, he says, no, you got to go take the land. Which one is it? Is he giving it to them or taking it? Are they taking it? Yes. And how about this? When God says that something is a done deal, it's a done deal. In the mind of God, verse 21, by the time we get to verse 21, In verse 20, he's talking about the fact that they're going to have to go take it. I'm giving it to you. It's going to be an ongoing process. Verse 21, I've given it to you. It's already done. In the mind of God, it's already accomplished. This is why we have what's called the prophetic future. The prophets do this all the time. They speak about future events as if they're already a done deal. Because in the mind of God, they've already happened. And once God has determined it to be, it is. Even though it waits until time to actually happen. Because God stands outside of time. But he can say, you know what, I already know what's going to happen in the future. Therefore, it's already, I can speak of it as if it's already done. Even though it hasn't even happened yet in time. And my mind goes, up to the twilight zone. Wow, how does that happen? That's just because that's who he is. Now, go back to verse 20 and 21. I want to make another point here about Deuteronomy real quick. He says this, verse 20, and I said to you, you here, now you can't see this in Hebrew. Here's one of those times where you need some Hebrew, because we have in English one word, you. In Hebrew, we have 4 ways of saying you. You men, you women, you singular man, you singular woman. So I have 4 forms. Here it's masculine plural. You all. We'll use the masculine plural for all. Okay? So, and you all. When we get to verse 21, he says you singular. You can't tell it in your English text because we only got one word you in English. Verse 21 he says, look, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Okay, and the word the you in verse 20 is plural. Here's the point. What does that matter? Okay. Who cares whether it's plural or singular? There's going to be times in the book of Deuteronomy that he's going to speak to you all and say, this is about you all. Plural. And then there's going to be times where he hones down and says, no, this is about you, singular. But the point is that he wants us to see that you, singular, is also part of the bigger picture. So that it's not just individuals, it's also the corporate and the communal. So he's drawing in not just the idea that, this is about, and I say this because, here again, our Western English traditions, how many of you have heard this one before? And I get the point, don't get me wrong on this, I get the point, but I'll say things like this. Every one of us, how many of you have heard this? Every one of us should have our own individual, personal walk with God. And I agree with that. I agree with that on many levels. However, what that tends to lead people to is, well, then I could just worship God by myself. And me and God, it's all I need is me and God. On one level, that's true. We can make that case, but there's too many places where he says, no, you have to interact with other fellow believers. There's a lot of this you all that has to be involved in this. So it's not just you singular, it's you all, corporate. So that there's too many places where he says, you have responsibilities to others, and I can't have a responsibility to love you all if I never see you all. If I hide myself from you, how can I serve you? But this is what a lot of people think Christianity is, well, I can go off, and this is why the monastic lifestyle became popular. I go, put myself in some room somewhere with just my Bible, and all I'll do is pray and read my Bible all day. And I'll walk with God. Okay. There's nothing wrong with moments like that, and periods and seasons like that. However, if you do that for the rest of your life, it becomes problematic for the biblical text because it assumes that you're in community, that you're in some fellowship and body where you're growing and you're benefiting from and you're blessing each other. You all. Beware of people who are lone rangers, who think that they can live a life of true faith and obedience to God apart from a community of faith. It just doesn't happen. Not long term. The truth is this. I need you, and you need me. We need each other. I need the community of faith, you need the community of faith. For better or worse. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. But the truth is, we still need each other. And it's often easy for us in our Western culture to think, well, you know what, I'll just be a lone ranger. I'll just kind of do my own thing. I'll just kind of pull back and I can sit in my home, I can have my Bible, I can just do what I want and live my life the way I want to. And God says, yeah, but you gotta love one another, serve one another, pray for one another. All these one another's, how can you be one another if there's no other people around you? You're living in isolation. So the Deuteronomy says, no, it's about you all and about you. It's both. It's not either or, it's both and. And by the way, God is giving this, and God has given it. God is participial in the process. God is involved in the process. But He's also sees the beginning from the end and has already given it. It's already a done deal. So He's got both of those covered. He's got the process covered, and He's got the end also covered as well. Any questions or comments? All at once? Comments, questions? Thinking? Not thinking? All right. Must be hungry. Okay. Please take your siddur.